Morning, Lord Horam.
Morning.
In a moment or two, Miss Richards will ask you the questions. First, Mary will invite you to take the oath. Let me explain that you're talking not just to those you see in front of you and to your left, but also to an audience which will be watching on YouTube or live stream. It'll be numbered in 3 figures, and they are the larger audience, perhaps, that you will be addressing. Mary.
Please state your full name.
John Rose Horam.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Lord Horam, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm just going to start with an overview of your political career.
Right.
You began as an MP in 1970, and you were at that stage an MP for the Labour Party.
Correct.
You remained an MP until 1983, but from 1981 to 1983 you sat as a member of the SDP.
Correct.
You didn't gain re-election in the 1983 election, and you then, however, joined the Conservative Party in 1987, and you were elected as a Conservative MP in 1992.
That's correct.
You stepped down as an MP in 2010. You were created a life peer, and you remain an active member of the House of Lords. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Now, in terms of governmental roles, you were a Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Department of Transport between 1976 and 1979.
That's correct.
You were then a Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Office of Public Service and Science, which was part of the Office of the Duchy of Lancaster, for a few months in 1995.
That's right. Yep.
And then, and this is obviously the reason why you're giving evidence today, you were a Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Department of Health from the 29th of November 1995 to the beginning of May 1997.
That's correct.
And so my questions will focus upon those 17 months at the Department of Health. During the time you were at the Department of Health, John Major was Prime Minister.
Right. Yes.
Stephen Dorrell was the Secretary of State for Health.
That's right.
I think the Minister of State for Health was Gerald Malone.
He was.
You had an equivalent in the House of Lords who was Julia Cumberledge.
That's right.
And your predecessor in the particular role that you undertook had been Tom Sackville.
That's right.
Now, before we look at your time at the Department of Health, there were a couple of errors in your witness statement that I'm just going to correct. They're very minor errors. And just for the sake of the record, if we can have up on screen, please, Lawrence, WITN 5294001. If we go to page 21, the paragraph at the bottom of the page, paragraph 2.27, the reference in the last line to a minute of the 6th of January should be a reference to a minute of the 12th of January.
Yep.
And then if we turn to page 45, paragraph 2.81 at the bottom of the page, the sentence at the very end of the page ends as they.
Yes.
And then top of the next page reads the UK, and there are some words missing. I'll just read out those words for the record. So after as they, the words should be inserted, had been subject to litigation and been found liable, which had not occurred in, and then we pick up the sentence the UK. So those were, I think, two minor errors in the statement. There's a handful of documentary references, additional documentary references, but I'm not going to trouble you with them. To the extent that we need to look at the documents, I'll do that as we go along.
Yep.
So In terms of the role of the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State in the Department of Health, how in general terms would you describe your role there?
Well, I had 31 different aspects to the Department of Health to cover, which is quite a lot. I suppose my role was to deal with Parliament quite a lot. I had to take a bill through dealing with community health councils, for example, and to act as the first port of call for dealing with correspondence from members of Parliament, and all that detailed work responding to the situation as I found it.
And as I understand your statement, you didn't, when you took up your post, receive any specific briefing or handover, rather you were briefed by civil servants on relevant issues as and when they arose.
That's right, because I wasn't part of my appointment wasn't part of a general reshuffle. There was no opportunity for people to come in and brief me or brief everybody on their new roles. I simply was put in there and had to find my way as I went along.
And then just to get a flavour of the areas of responsibility that were allocated to you, so to speak, some of them are set out in your witness statement.
Yeah.
So WITN 5294001 again, please, Lawrence. Page 8.
Yeah.
And it's paragraph 1.14. You said you had 31 areas of responsibility, and they included acute services, national blood services, private finance initiative, capital investment, Department of Health Management, waiting lists, community health councils, family planning, and NHS estates. And in practice, your statement tells us that the private finance initiative work and community health council work occupied the majority of your time, or a significant part of your time?
They were big items. I wouldn't say the majority of time, but they were big items. When you're doing a bill, for example, the reforming community health councils, and that's very important because community health councils are the ordinary person's first point of contact with their local health service, so you want to get that right. There was a major change going on here, and that when you are taking something through Parliament, you, as it were, go into a tunnel. You spend 2 or 3 days every week in Parliament working on this bill, answering all the questions, and I was the only person on the bill, nobody else on the bill, just the only person from the Department of Health. So you're sort of consumed by this for a period. You're almost outside your normal work. You have to almost put that on one side and concentrate on that. And then the PFI, the Private Finance Initiative, was a particular difficult responsibility because it was quite clear that we were at the end of a parliament. I mean, there was only another sort of year or year and a half to go maximum. And we were trying to set up new hospitals funded in a different way, a way which has been used in other sectors, but not in health. And that meant a lot of time dealing with city people who were involved in possibly financing these hospitals. So both that were big tranches of work in addition to the other 29.
I wonder, Lord Horam, if I can just ask you to do one thing. You're so keen to tell us what you have to say that your words are coming out very, very quickly.
Right.
And we do have
Slow down.
somebody... Yeah, please.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the responsibility for the national blood services, that responsibility brought with it the issue of any provision of assistance or support to those infected from blood or blood products.
Correct.
And obviously we'll pick that issue up in some detail. You also had ministerial responsibility for the look-back exercise, although that was already underway by the time you took up your post.
Yeah.
In terms of HIV, AIDS and hepatitis more generally, the policy responsibility for that, as I understand it, rested with Baroness Cumberledge, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
And then the responsibility for issues relating to blood internationally rested with a different parliamentary Under-Secretary,
That's
John
right.
Bowis.
Correct.
Do you know why that was?
No, I don't. Obviously, that division of responsibilities predates my appointment.
You took over responsibility for BSc and CJD from Baroness Cumberledge in January 1996. Do you recall why that happened?
No, I don't. No, I don't, frankly.
Now, you were in post for around 17 months, and we've seen from other evidence the inquiry's heard that there was quite a significant turnover of junior ministers in the Department of Health. Was that something which, looking at it now, you think an advantage or a disadvantage?
Disadvantage. Definitely a disadvantage. I mean, my own feeling after looking back with hindsight is you need about 18 months to really get into the feeling of a department, what the issues are, to hit your stride, as it were. After that, you can be productive. I think that a minimum, should be 3 years in a department before you can actually make any effect on policy and so forth. And I only had 17 months.
Now, given the breadth of your areas of responsibility and the fact that there was no formal training and you yourself didn't have, any medical or scientific background, would it be fair to say that you would be heavily reliant upon the information and advice supplied to you by officials within the Department of Health?
Yes, you would be right about that.
Did you have, as far as you can recall, any particular knowledge of HIV or AIDS or hepatitis C when you took up the post?
No particular knowledge, no, apart from one family friend who'd had a road accident and therefore had a blood transfusion and had contracted hepatitis C, and I was aware of the effect on her. And secondly, a constituent, young man, and I think that was, I saw him fairly regularly with his mother, and therefore was aware of the devastating effect it had on him.
You observe in your statement as well that you had some other sources of information. You had the Hemophilia Society, and we'll look at some of the interactions there. You'd have letters from MPs,
yes,
constituents.
Yes, all of that. I thought you mentioned sort of personal ones rather than sort of official ones. Officially, I had, of course, lots of correspondence from people. And, of course, I say parliamentary secretaries dealt with the correspondence, and therefore I would deal with any correspondence surrounding this.
In your statement, you say, and it's paragraph 1.22, I think. It's just, yes. So it's page 9, please, Lawrence, bottom of the page. You say at the bottom, any new or significant changes of departmental policy would be agreed by the Secretary of State for Health. And then you say there were regular ministerial meetings. How regular were the meetings?
Very regular. Stephen Dorrell had a very good practice, I think, of having what he called breakfast meetings, where he and all the ministers would meet up, sometimes with the top civil servant, sometimes not, sometimes with the parliamentary private secretary, who was an MP but not a minister. I remember Giles Brandreth was the rather amusing PPS in our case. He would have regular breakfast meetings, probably 3 times a week, which we discuss informally political and departmental matters without any let or hindrance. Anyone could say anything.
And were those types of meetings minuted?
No. At least I don't think so.
How, in general terms, how easy was it for you coming in as a relatively junior, as a junior minister, relatively junior MP in terms of the length of time you'd been with the Conservative Party? How easy was it for you to raise matters or express disagreement with either the Minister of State or the Secretary of State?
Not difficult, really. I think it wasn't a problem with the Minister of State, because the Minister of State wasn't really part of the chain of command, if you like. He was a deputy to the Secretary of State who would deputise for him on occasions where the Secretary of State couldn't handle it for any reason. But really the line of command was the Secretary of State, for my issues, the Secretary of State and then me. And therefore I could talk to Stephen, who I knew well, at our breakfast meetings or otherwise, and raise issues with him in whatever way I felt. Obviously he was much more experienced than me in parliamentary terms and in conservative political terms, but it wasn't difficult to talk to him. He was a very open man.
And then, again, just at a very general level, do you recall whether you had any interactions or dealings either on an ad hoc basis or on a regular basis with what's been termed the territorial departments? In other words, Welsh Office, Northern Ireland,
No.
Scotland?
No, I don't recall that at all. I don't think I did, frankly.
So I'm going to now pick up the chronology of your involvement with the question of whether there should be some form of financial support or compensation for those infected with hepatitis C. And just to give a couple of dates, or a date before we look at some of the documents, you took up your post end of November 1995. Earlier that year, March 1995, the Hemophilia Society had launched a campaign which included a call for financial support. So that's just to set the background. And then if we look at a couple of documents that predate your arrival by a few days, the first is DHSC 00-42937_057, please. So this is a briefing for the Prime Minister, 21st of November 1995, so just over a week before you take up your post. And it's really just to get a sense of what the pre-existing policy or line was at that point in time. If we have the heading compensation, please, Lawrence, in the paragraphs below that, we can see there what's said is, what the ON member is asking for is compensation for patients where, tragic though their circumstances are, no fault and no negligence on the part of the NHS has been proved. The House will understand the significance and implications of such a move. The principle involved is not one which can or should be lightly breached. My right honourable friend, Secretary of State for Health, has reiterated the policy of his predecessors, most recently in evidence to the Health Select Committee, July 1995, that he does not believe no-fault compensation is a sensible use of NHS resources. So that's the policy of the Department of Health, the policy of the government at the time you took up your post.
That's correct.
Now, within, I think, only 1 or 2 days of you taking up your post, the Hemophilia Society's interim report on hepatitis C and its impact was published. And if we go to DHSC 0004498_141, we have a message here that the date at the top of the page is the 30th of November 1995. So it's your second day in office. And it's a message from Mr. Pudlow in the Department of Health to Mr. Billinge in the Department of Health. But it's copied, if we just go up the page, sorry, Lawrence. It's copied to, amongst others, Marguerite Weatherseed, and she was in your private office, I think.
That's right.
And then if we go to the bottom of half of the page, we can see the subject is Hep C, Hemophilia Society Campaign for Compensation. This is to alert you to the publication on Monday, 4 December, of a report by the Hemophilia Society on the impact on its members who have been infected with hepatitis C through blood products. You will be aware that the Society are campaigning for compensation for such members similar to that provided for people infected with HIV through blood/blood products. The report, based on a survey carried out by the Society, looks at health, welfare and financial implications, e.g. loss of work, resulting from the infection, it will no doubt be used as evidence to support the contention that members are suffering hardship through no fault of their own and should be compensated. John Marshall MP has a reachable oral on Tuesday and he will be armed with a copy. It is likely that the press will run stories the same day. I'm trying to get hold of an advance copy. The line to take should remain, and then this is what's set out as the line to take. The government has great sympathy for those infected with hepatitis C as a result of NHS treatment, but as no fault nor negligence on the part of the NHS has been proved, there are no plans to make special payments. And then, if we then pick it up with your own involvement, the next day, DHSC 00429370_071. This is again from Mr. Pudlow to your private office, 1st of December 1995. It refers in the heading to John Marshall and the anticipated oral question. And it says, at yesterday's briefing meeting for the above oral, PSH, and that's you, I think, Lord Horam, asked for a note on the expected Hemophilia Society report on the impact of Hep C. This has now been sent to the Secretary of State, and I'm simultaneously faxing an advance copy. And then we'll look at a moment at the note. But it would appear that one of the very first issues that you faced when you took up your post was this issue of hepatitis C and financial support.
That's correct.
Do you remember whether this was something that you knew about at all before from any earlier parliamentary debates or conversations, or whether this was something that was completely new to you as a topic?
Well, it wasn't completely new to me because I remember I told you two personal examples of my own life. I was aware of it. It wasn't completely new, but it was very new from a departmental point of view. I really had no awareness of the problem until having to deal with it.
We can see there that there's reference to there having been, the previous day, the 30th of November, a briefing meeting for the oral question. What was the normal process when there was going to be a question that you might need to answer in Parliament?
I would meet up with one of the civil servants who would run through the suggestions they had about possible answers to the question and a sort of briefing on the background information that was needed to respond to the question.
Now, the note that Mr. Pudlow refers to in this minute is at DHSC 00429370_072. You also refer to this in your witness statement, Lord Horam, at paragraph 2.16, in case you need to check that. But I'm just going to look at the note for now. So we can see in the first paragraph, it's dealing with the Hemophilia Society's report, and it says the report claims that some 3,100 haemophiliacs have been infected with Hep C as a result of treatment with contaminated blood products. The fact of infection is not at issue, and if anything, the true figure may be slightly higher. The number of infected members included in the survey is not given, but is reasonable to suppose that the published evidence is emotively and selectively used to support the Society's conclusions. Over 18 separate individuals are quoted, some several times. Overall, the effects described of Hep C on people's lives is not in dispute. And then the next paragraph says this: the sample is not sufficiently large, nor the methodology sufficiently scientific to allow valid conclusions that are representative to be drawn. For example, the sample is unrepresentative in that well in excess of 20% are suffering from liver damage, whereas both the report and officials accept that a proportion of only 10 to 20% would be expected. Now, just pausing there, Lord Horam, do you know whether the department, during the time this issue was under consideration, ever considered commissioning its own assessment of the scale of the problem? We see the criticism here of the sample and the methodology, but did the department actually commission any scientific research of its own on this particular issue?
I'm not aware of it doing so.
And then if we just carry on with the paragraph, some of the criticism seem to be of failings of clinical management by doctors, dentists and others rather than of the government to provide compensation. There are occasional inaccuracies of fact, e.g. the suggestion in section 1, second page states that clotting factor concentrates were thought to be safe at the time they were used, but haemophilia patients nonetheless became infected with 2 life-threatening viruses, which is true of HIV in earlier years. And then this is untrue for Hep C from the early 70s onwards, because it was appreciated that haemophilia patients were at risk, and indeed some were becoming jaundiced following treatment. It was an accepted side effect at that time, taking into account the benefit. Now, this obviously is not, these are not your words, Lord Horam, this is a note being prepared for you by officials, but the phrase, it was an accepted side effect at that time, taking into account the benefit, doesn't tell us who that was accepted by. Government, doctors, NHS, or critically, patients.
That's perfectly fair.
Do you... We'll look and see what's said at later stages about what patients knew, but was it your impression, if you can recall, or looking at this, what you think you might have thought, that what was being said was that this was a risk that patients knowingly took?
No, I don't have any recollection of that.
And then over the page, we can see the line to take under the heading general is about welcoming the report as a contribution to our understanding of the effect that hepatitis C has on sufferers and their families. And then in terms of the recommendations, if we just look at the whole of the page first of all, please, Lawrence, we can see there are 4 headings there: financial help, public education, treatment and care, and further research. I'm only going to be asking you, Lord Horam, for present purposes at least, about the financial help. And we can see there the line to take that's being given to you is, I have enormous sympathy for those inadvertently infected. We have no plans to provide compensation. These patients received the best treatment that was available at the time, and we do not accept that there was negligence. Now, I'm going to come back at a later stage, Lord Horam, to this idea of the best available treatment. But I think it's right to say that you were repeatedly told in the documents prepared for you that that was the case, that patients received the best available treatment at the time.
That is right.
The interim report itself, on which Mr. Pudlow was here commenting, is at HSOC 0002726_002. And I'm just going to look at a little of it, Lord Horam, just to so that we can see the kind of information that the Hemophilia Society was providing to the department. So if we go to the second page, purpose of the report, the first paragraph explains that the purpose of the study is to examine the needs of people with haemophilia and hepatitis C, their partners and families, and to review existing support services. And then the third paragraph explains that the interim report focuses on what the government can do to help alleviate some of the financial and social consequences faced by those infected and their families. A report on the complete research will be produced early in 1996. And then if we go to the next page, we've got the executive summary. If we just look at the bullet points, more than 3,000 people with haemophilia have been infected with HCV as a result of their treatment with contaminated blood products. All face the possibility of cirrhosis, liver cancer and liver failure. At least 50 people have died from liver failure between 1988 and 1994. 14 are known to have died in 1994. Among those not yet seriously ill, the damaging impact on their lives is already apparent. There are fears of infecting partners, not being able to support dependents, and the risks of having a child. Income has fallen as the ability to work is restricted, children's education has been disrupted. Stress and anxiety has pushed some individuals and families to breaking point. Additional expenses are incurred. Life insurance premiums have become prohibitive. The government is asked to take immediate action and provide funding for, and then the first bullet point is financial support to individuals. And then if we go over the page, we can see the heading background to the research. I don't propose to read through all of that, but the third paragraph explains it is known that hepatitis C, as well as causing chronic liver disease in approximately 80% of those infected, can also progress in between 10 to 20% of those with the chronic condition to cirrhosis of the liver. It can also cause cancer of the liver and death. This progression can take 20 to 40 years. Over 50 people with haemophilia are known to have died from liver failure between 1988 and 1994, and 14 in 1994 alone. And then we can see the next page. It's headed Health Problems Facing People with Haemophilia and Hepatitis C. I'm not going to read through all of it, but if we go to the bottom of the page, we can see it says among people with chronic hepatitis C, there were reports of, and then there's a range of serious and debilitating conditions or consequences there set out. And then if we go on to page 7, please, Lawrence. You'll see, Lord Horam, there's a section on social and financial implications for people infected with hepatitis C, beginning stress and anxiety. And if we just go, bottom half of the page, please. So under that last quote from Mrs. F, age 52, it says, people reported that they're suffering uncertainties and worries about their health and their future, which leads to stress and anxiety. The progress for any individual with chronic hepatitis C is generally not known, but for the group as a whole, it's known that 10 to 20% will develop serious liver damage. Some will develop cancer of the liver. This uncertainty and fear for the future adds to the stress of individuals who are concerned not just for the future of their own health, but also how to cater for the future of their dependents. Many have young children. And then if we just go on to the next page, please. It's the 5th paragraph, beginning the lack of public knowledge and awareness. The lack of public knowledge and awareness about haemophilia generally and HCV in particular can lead to social ostracism as people feel there is no one to talk to who will understand their fears. And then there's a description, for example, of problems in getting dental treatment and so on. Now, I'm not going to go through the rest of the report, but there are sections on impact on family life, employment, education, loss of earnings, and so on. We know from some documents we'll look at in a few minutes that you were keen to read the report properly and understand it, because you said so in Parliament. Do you recall what your thoughts were or your reaction was when you did have the opportunity to sit down and read through the report properly?
Well, this was the interim report.
Yes.
Which was to be followed by the full research report, which I don't think was produced until February.
That's right.
Right. Obviously, when I had the opportunity to read this, I mean, one is struck by the awful consequences of the condition. And I also knew from my constituent the difficulties he faced. So I just had total sympathy for the people involved.
And if we just look at page 16 of this report, we'll see the recommendations that were made by the Haemophilia Society. So under the heading Financial Help to Individuals, the recommendations were twofold. A hardship fund should be set up by the government immediately to help those who are already ill. These people have suffered major reductions in their income through their illness, but are also experiencing increased costs, such as more prescription charges, transport costs and food costs. The fund should also provide financial support for the dependents of those who have already died as a result of HCV. And then the second recommendation, an across-the-board payment to all those infected who are suffering from the uncertainty of not knowing whether HCV will have a severe or even fatal impact on their lives. That was, I think, published on the 4th of December 1995, but an advance copy had been sent to the Department of Health, I think, on the 1st of December. There was then, if we go to your witness statement, so WITN 5294001, page 17, please. We can see set out in paragraph 2.17 of your statement a parliamentary answer you gave on the 5th of December 1995. If we pick it up in the italicised section, the 4th paragraph, you congratulate the Hemophilia Society for its review and Mr. Marshall for his, what you describe as relentless questioning over many years, which has already received quite staggering results. And then you say you've not yet read the full review, but you shall do so as a matter of priority and obviously take its conclusions most carefully into account. And then you are asked whether there would be an early and sympathetic decision to bring some hope to families. And you say, I assure the honourable gentleman that the problem will always receive sympathy from me. So that's the 5th of December. I'm not going to go to the underlying documents in relation to that. What I want to pick up is a debate in Parliament then on the 13th of December. You refer to this in the next paragraph of your witness statement, but we'll go to the original documents. But before we look at the parliamentary text, we just look at DHSC 0006774_066. Now, this is a draft of a text for you to speak to in Parliament, as I understand it. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
And again, is that a normal part of the process, that the officials within the department will provide a draft for you to speak to in Parliament?
Yes.
Now, I'm not going to go through it line by line because of more interest is what you actually said in Parliament. And that is at HSOC 0002072. So we can see this from the date at the top of the page. This is the 13th of December 1995. So I think you've now been in post for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We can see that an MP, George Moody, is giving a speech. Now, I'm not going to read through what he says in this first page. He talks about the people being infected with hepatitis C as a result of treatment with contaminated blood products. If we go to the second page, please, Lawrence, I want to pick it up halfway down the left-hand column when Mr. Moody asks what can be done. So if we can have the bottom half of that page. Thank you. So what can be done? Those 4 words represent the point at which, unfortunately, the government and those concerned have in the past parted company. It is agreed that all I have spoken about until I uttered the 4 words, what can be done, is very sad and deserving of sympathy. Yet when the matter was debated briefly in the other place, that's parliamentary terms for the House of Lords, I think, Lord Horam, is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
What followed was prevarication and an unwillingness to make any real contribution to ease the plight of those infected. To be fair and to balance the picture, the government were sympathetic and supportive of haemophiliacs who received contaminated blood and became infected with HIV. It is beyond argument that that disease is more severe than hepatitis C, but the similarities between them are too great to be ignored. The circumstances under which individuals became infected with a second disease are exactly the same in each case. The test to prevent HIV being passed on stopped the hepatitis C virus being passed on. Both illnesses can be and are debilitating. All those who suffer face the worry of passing the disease to a loved one or to an unborn child. All face difficulties in education and employment. All face the impossibility of long-term financial commitments. All face the impossibility of gaining life insurance unless it is offered at a totally prohibitive cost. And then Mr. Moody sets out, and we see a reference to this family in a number of different parliamentary reports. I won't read it out, but 3 brothers, 2 infected with HIV who received some financial assistance, a third infected with hepatitis C, contracted hepatitis C, died, received nothing. Top of the next page, please. Right-hand column, if we pick it up in the second paragraph, when we debated the subject before, the then Minister talked in global sums and mentioned a figure of £6 billion, representing the cost of a total no-fault compensation scheme. That is not what we are asking for. We ask simply that a relatively discreet small group of people should receive some assistance as a mark of the financial hardship and of the physical and emotional pain that they are suffering. Of course, someone in the Treasury or even someone in the Department of Health will say that that would create a precedent. However, the argument about precedent is the argument of administrative convenience. It is not the argument of compassion or of Christmas. You and I, Mr. Deputy Speaker, have just come from the Christmas Carol service. The precedent was created when the Macfarlane Trust was set up and the government rightly decided to make ex gratia payments to haemophiliacs infected with HIV and then to non-haemophiliacs infected with that virus. The Prime Minister took a major part in both those decisions, so I hope that the report of our debate will be sent to him so that he can act upon it. And then just a little further down the page, the previous page still. Sorry, I've got hard copies, two copies of the same page. No, that's fine. So we then get a response from you.
Mm-hmm.
If we, I'm sorry, can we go back to the previous page because I've skipped over something. It continues with Mr. Moody's contribution. What I should have made clear is what I just read from was Mr. John Marshall's contribution. We see that bottom of the page. We can go to the next page. My apologies, Lawrence. So we can go to the next page. So I'm not going to read through the rest of what Mr. Marshall says, but we then see your response, Lord Horam. I think we can pick it up at the bottom of that page, the last paragraph, where it says, I've just come to the Department of Health and there is a great deal to read. I would like to read the Haemophilia Society's report thoroughly, but I've not yet had the opportunity to do so. I shall make that a very high priority, but I want to read the report and not merely a brief. I am aware that the report graphically describes the problems experienced by some sufferers who find that they now have to contend with the effects of hepatitis C infection on top of the effects of haemophilia. Now, you then in the next paragraph say this, and again, I'm going to read it out now, but come back to it later. You say this, the great benefits to patients of medical procedures rarely come without some risk. I would like to put the matter into that context. It is important to remember that it's not always possible at the time treatment is given to fully appreciate the risk or to avoid suspected or known risks. In the case of each individual patient, a balance must be struck between the benefit to be gained versus any possible risk. The patients we are now discussing received the best treatment available in the light of medical knowledge at the time. I do not think that either the honourable gentleman or my own friend will dispute that. The factor VIII concentrate, the cause of the infection, has brought great benefits to patients with haemophilia. Previously, only about 5% of patients with severe haemophilia reached the age of 40, whereas by 1980, as a result of factor VIII concentrate and drugs, the life expectancy was very close to that of normal males. And then you go on to set out what is said to be a number of other advantages of factor VIII concentrate. Now, would it be right to understand, Lord Horam, that kind of information, in particular about what's said to be the impact on life expectancy, would have been supplied to you by officials within the department.
Yes, it was.
And the inference, I think that is being set out in the first part of that paragraph is to say that this dramatic change in life expectancy was attributable to factor VIII concentrates. That's what you were saying.
That is what is being said.
The inquiry knows that there is some evidence to suggest that a treatment called cryoprecipitate, which was available before factor VIII concentrates became more widely available, may have made a major contribution to improved life expectancy. Do you recall whether cryoprecipitate was something that was ever raised with you by your officials?
No, it was not.
And then, if we just go to the next paragraph, please, in your speech. You say most haemophilia patients infected with hepatitis C were so infected before the blood products were treated to destroy viruses in 1985 and well before tests for hepatitis C became available. Before then, the only way to safeguard blood was to limit those from whom blood was taken by a system of self-deferral. This excluded, amongst others, those known to be suffering from hepatitis or any other liver disease and drug misusers. Again, would it be fair to assume, Lord Horam, that information about the system for safeguarding blood would be based upon what officials had told you rather than your own independent knowledge?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you recall whether officials ever talked to you, at this point at least, about how blood products used for the treatment of haemophilia had come from, to a large extent, products collected in the blood collected in the United States?
That was an issue that I was aware of. Whether officials brought it to my attention, I can't recall.
And do you recall whether anyone ever talked to you about how blood had been taken, to some extent at least, in the States and in the United Kingdom from prisons?
I was aware of that. I think it was general knowledge. But I don't know whether officials specifically brought it to my attention.
And do you refer here to the system of self-deferral, to the idea of trying to exclude those who might be at high risk. Did officials ever talk to you about whether there were the adequacy of that system, how well it worked or didn't work in practice?
No, I don't recall that being brought out with me.
You then set out some figures. I'm not going to read through those. But if we, I think, then go to the next page, next column, sorry, same page. We can see there, the third paragraph, you refer then to the Hemophilia Society's report again. And then Mr. Marshall intervened in the debate and said, does my honourable friend agree that if a relatively small proportion of sufferers will develop cirrhosis of the liver and die prematurely, the cost of helping them will be correspondingly small? So Mr. Marshall, I think here suggesting, or this is how you understood it, Lord Horam, that you could have a more limited financial support scheme that provided financial support to those who developed cirrhosis of the liver. That was how you understood it?
That is indeed how I understood it.
And you said this in response: yes, that is a valuable point which my honourable friend makes for the first time. The Hemophilia Society, understandably, as it's not completed its study, has not made full and costed proposals. We've never received such a suggestion to study, and I would be interested to hear details of the relatively modest and restricted proposal which my honourable friend has made during the debate. And then you set out a number of other matters, including some issues that have been raised about treatment with alpha interferon. If we go to the next page, please, and we look at, so it's the left-hand column, the last paragraph. You said this at the end of your speech: all that I've heard in today's debate suggests that I should read the Hemophilia Society's report extremely closely, and I promise the House that I shall look at the matter afresh in the light of what is said in the report. We have also heard from my honourable friend a sensible suggestion for a more modest and restricted compensation scheme than has been hitherto mentioned. For those reasons, I shall leave the matter at this stage, although I give my full sympathy to those who have the disease. So, Lord Horam, is it right to understand that you were promising or indicating that there were, you would look at two matters? First, you'd look at the whole matter afresh in light of the Hemophilia Society's report, and secondly, you wanted to think about the narrower proposal that Mr. Marshall had put forward.
Yes, you state that totally accurately.
I think I'm right in saying that those promises you gave were effectively they were a deviation from the script in a sense. That was not what officials had primed you to say.
As regards the first one, reading the report extremely closely, I think I would have said that anyway. I don't know whether, I can't recall whether I would have been briefed to that effect by.
That may be right. It's more it's the use of the word, I shall look at the matter afresh.
Ah.
Was this your initiative, if I can put it a different way?
Well, they were my words, and so I take responsibility for those. I don't know whether they were the words of the civil servants in their briefing or not.
Well, we can look and see what the response was, I think, perhaps to what you said and pick it up in that way. So there we have your speech on the 13th of December 1995, your words to Parliament. If we just, again, taking things in a strictly chronological order, go to DHSC 0004060_002. Now, this is a letter sent from you the following day, the 14th of December 1995, to an MP who had written on behalf of a constituent. And if we can see, I think probably just in that's the second through to the fourth paragraph, you say in this letter, my predecessor explained the government's position on those infected with hepatitis C in the adjournment debate on the 11th of July. We have great sympathy with those patients who may have become infected with hepatitis C through blood transfusions or blood products. However, in the absence of negligence, we have no plans to make special payments. The next paragraph then again talks about patients receiving the best treatment available in the light of medical knowledge at the time. And then the next one says the government's never accepted the case for a no-fault scheme of compensation for medical accidents. It's unfair to others and still requires proof of causation, which is often difficult to establish. Every individual case where a medical accident occurs is a personal tragedy for both the individual concerned and their family. If the NHS is proved negligent in a court, it accepts its liability to pay damages, and so on. And so the letter continues. What you say about this in your statement, Lord Horam, and perhaps if you want to turn that up, WITN 5294001, and we can go to page 19, I think. Yes, paragraph 2.20, page 19. What you say is this, and you refer to the letter, and then you say in the third line, as the inquiry will be aware, responses such as this would be drafted by officials in the first instance and the draft sent to me for approval. This letter would undoubtedly have reflected the department's established position at the time against a hepatitis C payment scheme. For example, the reply stated that we had no plans to make special payments and argued that the most effective use of resources was to seek to improve the understanding, management and treatment of the condition. As I addressed below, I wanted to soften this standard line in correspondence, and we'll come on to the softening of the standard line. But essentially, although this letter was sent out the day after you'd said in Parliament you would look at matters afresh, it had been drafted, no doubt, before
Correct.
then,
That's correct.
and it reflected the existing
line.
policy.
Absolutely right.
So if we can then pick up on the response within government to what you had said in Parliament, and I think we can start at DHSC 00429370_036. This is from a Mr. Grice in the HM Treasury to Mr. Dobson in the Department of Health. It's dated the 18th of December 1995, and it says this. I was a little concerned to see Mr. Horam's remarks in the debate on haemophiliacs on the 13th of December, which we've just looked at. The government has a firm and agreed policy on such issues. Consistent with that policy and for the avoidance of doubt, I should indicate that the Treasury would be strongly opposed to what Mr. Horam termed the relatively modest and restricted proposal made by Mr. John Marshall MP. Now, you tell us in your statement, Lord Horam, I don't think we need to put it on screen, but it's paragraph 2.21, that it's highly unlikely that you would have seen this letter at the time.
That's correct.
Would it be right to understand that you saw it for the first time when it was provided to you for the purposes of making your statement?
Yes.
And having seen it for the first time, what's your reaction to seeing the Treasury write in these terms to another senior official within the department?
Concern. I mean, I think in a sense one could say the Treasury was doing its job. The Treasury is looking after the government, after the taxpayers' money, and has to look at all this. And it probably felt that I'd said something which was not consistent with the existing policy, and they were just stating to their colleagues in the Department of Health that this was the case.
Does it surprise you that this wasn't drawn to your attention at the time by officials within the Department of Health?
Yes.
Now, if we pick it up then, so we see that's the Treasury response. We can then get a sense of the internal Department of Health response from DHSC 0004498_051. And it's, you refer to this in paragraph 2.22 of your statement, but I think the document is probably more helpful to look at. So it's from Anne Towner to Mr. Pudlow. This is also sent to Ms. Weatherseed, so sent to your private office, 20th of December 1995. And it says this: correspondence on compensation for haemophiliacs infected with hepatitis C. Now, that's a reference to the kind of letters that MPs would write raising their concerns or constituents' concerns.
That's correct.
And you say this, you, and that I think is maybe Ms. Weatherseed, but in any event it doesn't matter, rang to advise that PSH, that's you, Lord Horam, would like the words "at present" inserted in the statement that we have no plans to make special payments in our replies to correspondence on compensation for haemophiliacs infected with hepatitis C. And then there's, I think, a reference to a particular letter where it's suggested that you'd already made such an amendment. And then paragraph 2 says, in answering recent parliamentary questions and in adjournment debates, PSH has said that he wishes to study the Haemophilia Society's interim report of its impact study carefully before coming to any conclusions about its implications. He has also indicated a willingness to study any new proposals, e.g. for schemes limited to those who develop chronic illness. However, we fear that if we were to qualify the existing line in correspondence as suggested, it would be taken as indicating a weakening of the government's position and imply that compensation is being considered, and further continued pressure would lead to concessions. In view of the above, PSH may wish to discuss the proposed additional wording with SOS, that's the Secretary of State. Now, it might be thought that last sentence has an air of you being sent off to the headmaster's study. Is that a fair way of reading it, do you think?
I wouldn't put it in quite those terms, but it was a sort of a warning, if you like.
A gentle rap across the knuckles.
You could put it like that if you wanted to, but a warning that I really ought to, if I'm going to go down this path, I really ought to discuss it with my colleague, the Secretary of State.
And we can see, I think there's an accurate account in the first part of paragraph 2 of what you'd said in the recent debates.
Yes.
You wanted to study the report, you wanted to consider any new proposals. But I think, is this right? It's clear what the departmental officials don't share your enthusiasm for
That's
looking
right.
at the matter.
That is correct.
And then we can see if we go to DHSC 0004498_188, this is a communication to the Permanent Secretary. Would the Permanent Secretary at that point have been Graham Hart, do you know?
Yes.
If the Secretary says the headmaster, I'm not quite sure what that makes the Permanent Secretary, but in any event, might be said there's an air of you being reported to the Permanent Secretary here. So the date is still the 20th of December 1995. There's a reference towards the bottom of what we see on the screen. Thank you for copying your minute to me. I've copied it onto the Permanent Secretary, and Miss Edwards, see the attached note. And then if we go down to the bottom of the page, and this is not, I think, something that you saw at the time. Again, your statement sets that out. But it says this: the Permanent Secretary may wish to be aware of the attached minute. I mentioned to him the other day that PSH was clearly not happy with the firm line ministers have taken up to now on compensation for haemophiliacs infected with hepatitis C. It is quite clear that he is trying to change the line little by little. He has had plenty of briefing, written and oral, on the subject, but his sympathy for those concerned is clearly uppermost in his mind. Cost comes second, hence his readiness to consider proposals for a scheme limited to those who have actually developed chronic illness, rather than extending to all who've been infected. Secretary of State met a group of haemophiliacs led by Roy Hattersley yesterday and made no, and then the word at the top of the next page is concessions. So if we just go back to the bottom of that previous page, and we just look at the text, those last 10 lines, I'll say thank you, Lawrence. Now, I think in your statement you suggest you weren't necessarily trying to change the line, you wanted to explore the position, however, with an open mind. Is that a fair summary? The reference there to cost coming second, was it your understanding, whether at the time or from looking at the fuller range of documents you've seen for the purposes of your statement, that from the department's perspective, as well as the Treasury's, cost came first?
I don't think it's a question of cost coming first. It's just that there was clearly a big cost, and the department had always taken the line that when it came to allocating money, treatment and health care was the first consideration and compensation the second consideration. Now,
were you at this point, or indeed at any point, made aware that in the previous, in the same calendar year, but earlier in 1995, Gerald Malone had voiced a similar view, and in the words of Baroness Bottomley yesterday, had overspoken or got a bit carried away, and again was, I think as my colleague Mr Hill put it, put back in his box. Were you aware at the time of Mr Malone having raised this issue a number of months previously?
No, I wasn't.
And then we can see at DHSC 0004498_045, this is the 21st of December 1995, and it's from Mrs Weatherseed in your private office to the departmental officials. It refers to the first of the 20th of December documents we looked at, Ms Towner's minute, rather than the minute to the Permanent Secretary. And it says that PSH, has seen Anne Towner's note of the 20th of December. Basically, he very much accepts the department's stance on this issue, but does not want to give the impression that he's deaf to the concerns of the haemophiliac community. He said at the recent adjournment debate that he wanted to read the Haemophilia Society's report carefully and would like to reflect that sort of attitude in the standard reply. However, he's noted your concerns about the wording he suggested and has asked whether you could propose an alternative form of words which would convey this. Now, can I just explore with you that first paragraph where what's said is that you very much accept the department's stance, but you don't want to give the impression of being deaf to the concerns of the haemophiliac community. Now, it might be said that wording's a bit ambiguous. Mm-hmm. Was it that you wanted to give the impression that you were listening, or was it that you genuinely wanted to consider the concerns of the community?
I wanted to consider the alternatives. That's why I commissioned the department to look at various alternative options.
And if we pick up your observation on this in your witness statement at WITN 5294001, page 21, paragraph 2.25, and it's just below the italicised extract from the document we've looked at, you say, "This minute reflects that while I was very sympathetic to those infected with hepatitis C through contaminated blood, I was fully aware of the concerns of the department about cost and precedent. I was, however, fighting to avoid being pinned down to this until I read into the subject more widely and had a chance to consider whether there were any other options." So that reflects your thinking at the time.
Indeed, yeah.
Now, if we then I don't think we need to put it up on screen, but I'll just read a reference into the transcript. It's HSOC 00143333. On the 21st of December, you wrote to the Reverend Tanner and explaining that you wanted to consider the report, and you suggested a possible meeting in the new year. You deal with that in your witness statement, paragraph 2.26, and explain that was essentially a holding reply. So I don't think we need to take time looking at that. But if we go to now early 1996, DHSC 0003883123, this is from your private office to Mr. Guinness within the Department of Health. And you say this, or she says this on your behalf in the first paragraph. PSH has been giving further thought to the issue of awarding compensation to haemophiliacs who contracted hepatitis C before routine screening of blood products was introduced. He is well aware of our current position on this issue and the reasons for this. However, against a background of mounting political pressure, he would like to explore the options for offering compensation, if only to assure himself that we've done all that is feasible. The reference there to mounting political pressure, is that essentially a reference to the views that were being expressed, I think, by MPs on, not just in opposition, but on a number of different MPs on this issue?
Yes.
Do you recall whether there were any other sources of pressure at that time? Was it, I suppose there was the Hemophilia Society's campaign itself?
Well, there was the Hemophilia Society's campaign.
And then Ms Weatherseed says, "I'd be grateful if you could prepare a submission for PSH setting out costed options for compensation, which could vary, for example, according to factors such as age, the existence of dependents, hardship factors limited to those who've actually developed Hep C. This should include an assessment of how far any of these options are likely to be acceptable to the Hemophilia Society. This should also provide advice on the likely availability of funds and the implications any change in policy might have in terms of triggering off demands from other areas, both from people, whether haemophiliacs or not, who were infected by blood rather than blood products, and more generally, for example, if blood or blood products are shown in future to have transmitted some as yet unrecognised infectious agent." So you essentially asked officials to go away and work up a set of options for you to consider.
That's right.
And then, if we could look at a document that I think is just a handful of days earlier than the one we've just looked at, DHSC 0042937032. Now, this is 8th of January 1995, but it's obvious from the context, and I think your statement also makes this point, that it should have been, it's January 1996 that's being referred to here. So I think that's just a typo early in a new year of not having changed the date.
Yeah.
It's from Mr. Guinness to Dr. Raymond, and it says this: I had a meeting with the Permanent Secretary on Friday. He was pleased to note that PSH had now agreed a draft with which we were happy. That's the wording of the standard letter, and we'll look at that in due course. And that the Secretary of State had recently written in firm terms to the Prime Minister on a constituency case. His view, and I read this, Lord Horam, as referring to the Permanent Secretary, his view is that if pressure continues, we shall eventually be forced to concede. It would be nice to do so in an orderly manner, but in practice the Treasury would be unlikely to budge until such time as the political situation became so untenable that the Prime Minister decreed that something had to be done. For the time being, therefore, we should continue to hold the line firmly. No specific action was requested, but it would probably be wise to undertake some contingency work on the sort of scheme favoured by John Marshall so that we can move quickly if necessary. Now, again, there's no indication that you would have seen this minute at the time.
No, I didn't.
Would it be right to understand, again, that you saw this for the first time for the purposes of preparing your statement to the inquiry?
That would be correct.
Were you surprised to learn that the Permanent Secretary's view was that the department or the government would eventually be forced to concede?
Yes.
Does it concern you that that's not information that was shared with you at the time?
Yes.
I'm conscious...
I don't know, just to add to that, it's a rather strange thing to have said in the context that we're talking about, because as far as I could see, the line had been maintained for quite a long time by various ministers. It would be odd for him to suddenly say even for the Permanent Secretary to say to another civil servant that we shall eventually be forced to concede. I mean, that's supposed to be a sort of judgment, which I'm rather surprised at, given the total context.
The tipping point that appears to be envisaged by the Permanent Secretary, assuming this to be an accurate representation of his views, is political pressure or an untenable political situation. Does that reflect the way in which decisions were taken within government at that time? That rather than looking at what might be said to be the case for supporting people in desperate circumstances, what's going to drive the government to change its position eventually is an untenable political situation?
Well, I think the underlying problem is reflected in the government's attitude, and I think that there is clearly a difficulty here in that the case has been conceded for people suffering from HIV, and therefore, by extension, should it be taken on by people suffering from hepatitis C. And I think that it's not really just, I don't think it's really just a matter of the politics or the political situation. I think there was an underlying tension, if you like, between what the real problem was and what the government's position had been for some time. And clearly, the Treasury would have a role in all this. And I think it's probably unfair to say it was just the politics of the matter. I think that there was a real problem here which the government was trying to address. And there will be varying degrees of pressure, which the Hemophilia Society, quite sensibly, was trying to mount to produce a change, because it believed there should be one. And I think it's perfectly proper for a government to say, well, there is a difficulty here. We are where we are. Let's see how it pans out. We know it's going to be difficult to change the line because the Treasury would have views as well as us. But we better wait to see how it pans out. Remembering I think this is 8th of January, and we hadn't yet seen the final report from the Hemophilia Society. So I think there will be an extent to which the government, any sensible government, would want to wait to see what impact that had.
But you, looking at it now, you would have wished to have been informed of the Permanent Secretary's views, presumably, because it would potentially impact upon your own thinking.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I would have liked to have been informed, because that was something I wasn't aware of. I mean, from my point of view, the position of the government, that is to say the Department of Health and the Treasury, is quite clear, had been so for a long time, and I had been, in effect, as you pointed out, rather warned off from trying to attempt to say, are there other options, more modest options, which we can look at?
And of course, if the department, the government waits until it's eventually forced by mounting political pressure to concede, almost inevitably there will have been individuals who would have died in that intervening period.
Absolutely, yes.
So I note the time, and perhaps we could take our break and pick up the chronology afterwards.
Yes, we'll do that. Now, Lord Horam, you're giving evidence under oath. What you must not do is talk to anyone about the evidence you have given, or any evidence which you anticipate you may yet be asked to give. But you can talk about anything else you like. We'll take a break now until 10 to 12.
Thank you, sir.
10 to 12.